Thanks a lot. So the title for today is about mentioned ecophysiology and biodiversity consequences of biological invasion. And we're actually going to take a step back, and I'm going to kind of explain a project that lays some of the groundwork for the research that I do now. So today we're going to talk about not so much plant physiology, but something that all of us do every day, really no matter where we are in life. We're going to talk about poop. Everybody poops. This is important in any ecosystem, obviously. Organisms need to take in material and process it, usually at like 10% efficiency, and put out a bunch of waste, and we need organisms that can cycle through all of that waste. So this project takes place in Kenya, right here in the Laikipia Plateau. So my pointer's not working, but it just bounces. Just yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so this project takes place in Laikipia, in the these highlands in central Kenya, which is like just east of the Rift Valley. And in this area, we have not only this mosaic of conservancies and private land that kind of work together to create really a success story for wildlife and savanna conservation in the area, but we also have, obviously, a ton of herbivores. Probably most common ones that you'll see in Laikipia are cattle and elephants. And I picked these two guys to show you not only because they're probably the most common herbivores you'll see in the area, but also because they put out a ton of poop. So domestic cattle, yeah, I mean, I wasn't aware of this until, like, I work with poop, but I didn't really think about how much an individual can put out in a day. So domestic cattle can put out 65 pounds of dung in a day. Elephants completely crush that. Oh my God. No pun intended. Putting out almost 3 times as much dung in a day. And if you, so this dung has to go somewhere. And in the savanna ecosystem, some of the most important, I just love this picture because there's like actually feet coming out of the bottom left there. But so you have to do something with all of this dung. And in the savanna ecosystem, termites and dung beetles are really important integral parts of this decomposition cycle. So, for instance, for every pound of elephant dung that is dropped in the savanna, and this is just kind of a rough estimate based on a few papers that I read, but for every pound of dung that's dropped, you get about 4,000 to 5,000 dung beetles responding to it in a day. And these can be some of the more iconic ones, like these big rollers that you see in the, anybody seen like True Facts About the Dung Beetle video? Yeah, so not all dung beetles are that like iconic or visible. Some of them are really tiny, like Aphidionide, or a really small group of dung beetles. But you get thousands of them responding to dung over the course of a day, and they can completely consume that pound that they're responding to. But of course, elephants put out 165 pounds of dung a day. So that is a losing battle just from like an individual elephant perspective. But these decomposers make it happen. And but the question that we're really asking in this talk is what happens when these guys are affected, or are they affected by biological invasion? So today we're going to talk about savanna dung communities. Are they soft targets for big-headed ants? And first I should probably explain to you guys what is the big deal with these big-headed ants. This is Phydolia megacephala. They are pretty troublesome species. Actually, let me rewind it for a bit. These right here are this is an example of the major workers. They only account for about 5% of the community in a colony, but they're really effective soldiers. Their jaws are actually so big that they can't feed themselves. The little ants have to feed them like some sort of pre-digested like goat. And then, but these ants are really effective at killing invertebrates in the areas that they invade. And that's because they're not only like have these strong jaws and they're soldiers, their minor workers are no joke either. Like they can gang up and rip apart insects. I've seen these ants, which are, I mean, they're tiny. Like you think that they're just like a little brown ant that's like eating your sugar or something, but they're actually pretty troublesome for an ecosystem. I've seen them rip apart praying mantises that are 100 times their own size just by ganging up on them. And so, like I said, they're a problem for anywhere that they invade. which happens to be really any tropical or subtropical area in the world. And this is not actually a map of their invaded range. This is just a map of the US military installations around the world. It's based on the number of individuals in those bases. Big-headed ants take it a step further. So this is their version of imperialism. They have, these are just sites that are invaded according to one study by James Wetter down at Florida Atlantic University. And I'm not saying that like detracting from his study, but this might not even be the full scope of their invasion around the world. So as you can see, they have invaded 6 of the 7 continents, though I don't think people are looking too hard down at like McMurdo Base in Antarctica, but who knows, maybe.
Did you say where they're from?
So that's a problem. We don't really know for sure where they're from. The best guess based on genetic markers that they've compared against other ant species, that they come from somewhere around actually like northwest of Kenya, possibly in Ethiopia. But there are also conflicting reports that they come from Madagascar, which would make this a bit of a incorrect part of the map. But basically they spread really easily along shipping lines, and especially in construction materials. So when people go out and build a new greenhouse in the middle of nowhere in Kenya or something like that, they'll drag a colony with them accidentally. And that's kind of the trend throughout the world, that these ants spread really easily along shipping lines, and we didn't pay attention to them until the last 20 or 30 years, really. I've even found some papers from like the 1960s and 70s where they were a recommended biological control in some like Southeast Pacific islands. Like, they're great. They kill all the pest insects. Like, they kill everything, actually. They're really bad for the ecosystem. So go us. But so this is really just one estimate of their invasion as of 2014. But like I said, we're focusing just on one invasion in Kenya. So specifically this, in Laikipia Plateau, I was working at this, at the Impala Research Center, which this is actually kind of a map of their grounds, and I'll explain what these symbols mean in just a minute. But it's actually a pretty small conservancy in the middle of Kenya that is host to not only UF researchers, but also Princeton University, UC Davis, and sort of the mosaic of other research teams. But the questions that I posed when I first noticed this invasive ant crawling all over the not only the living quarters and like cooking areas, but also like in the undeveloped areas of this conservancy. First, we asked, or do big-headed ants affect the native invertebrate community? It's a pretty simple question, but we hadn't really assessed the impact of this invasive ant at all in this ecosystem, except for one other paper that kind of looked at a different aspect of the ecosystem. But so anyway, we asked this basic question: do they affect the invertebrate community? And then secondly, we asked, could big-headed ant invasion indirectly affect dung breakdown? So if they were affecting the insect community at large, we thought, hell, they might be knocking out dung beetles, they might be killing termites. This whole study actually started because I was walking along our study abroad class, and I noticed that a pile of cow dung was just kind of surrounded by these invasive ants. And that was just the kernel of the idea that led to the study. So in order to get at those questions, this is me many haircuts ago, and also after 12 hours of measuring out dung piles. So I had to follow a cowbird for like a few hours the day before, and put all of the dung, as soon as it fell onto the ground, directly into this bin so that it wasn't colonized by any invertebrates after deposition. And then measured out 100-gram dung piles, so they're all uniform. And that's what all of these little bags here are. Actually, there were over 500 dung piles that I measured out. So that kind of gets at, we arrayed these at all these areas around the research center. So first we had to find out which areas were invaded and which were deemed to control. So the green dots on this map actually represent the 2 living centers at Impala Research Center. And then each of the red dots marked with a little eye, those indicate areas that we found to be invaded based on surveys with peanut butter baits. These ants like respond to peanut butter within an hour, so it's a really low cost, efficient way of finding out where they are. And then we also found control sites that were less than 500 meters away. So they were, we assumed them to be like basically ecologically the same, except for the fact that they are invaded or not, and that they are obviously closer to these epicenters of human activity. But in general, all these research sites were far enough from the human centers that humans don't really venture there. Both of these are surrounded by electric fences, so it would be pretty dangerous to go outside of these areas if you were just a regular human. But anyway, so at each of these sites, we laid out multiple transects with dung piles, and then we also, in order to actually identify the presence or not of insects as a like proximate factor in decomposition rates, we built these little exposures, which I took pictures of, and I somehow lost the pictures over the last 3 years. But basically, we used mesh and plastic cylinders to that allowed the dung material to still dry out and still experience rain and temperature and everything like the areas around it, but it kept out any insects larger than about 1 millimeter wide across their abdomen. And then we also wanted to capture what the overall insect community like in these areas. So we laid out just over 1,000 pitfall traps across these 6 sites over the course of 4 weeks. And we these pitfall traps are really simple. They're just plastic cups that you dig a small hole in the ground, you fill them with water that's slightly soapy so that if an insect goes up and tries to drink the liquid, the soap actually breaks the surface tension and they just fall right in. So these are really effective ways to survey insect community in an area, and also pretty good teaching tools and stuff. So if you're doing an activity for young kids to learn about insects, it's a pretty awesome way to do it. So, so what did we figure out with all these tools? So first, let's address the first question about insect diversity and abundance in invaded areas. So we found that the important part, sure enough, our invaded sites were invaded. So the pitfall or the peanut butter surveys were not wrong. Based on pitfall abundance surveys, we found that big-headed ants were basically non-existent at these non-invaded sites. These were a few outliers, but what can you do? But for the most part, they were present in huge numbers in these invaded areas, and that actually had a pretty significant effect, well, a statistically significant effect on species abundance and diversity based on those pitfall traps. So basically what we see is that when big-headed ants move into these areas, they prey on a wide range of species and reduce that assemblage of native species into a smaller like subset of resilient species. And the ones that remain are also, they remain in lower abundances. So we're like, oh, cool. We have, not cool, but all right, we have interesting results. Like they're hammering this insect community, both in terms of native diversity and abundance. So we thought, sure enough, they must be affecting dung breakdown. So when we collected those dung piles at the end of the study, we basically broke down, we dried them out in an oven and we broke them into like bits, and we were able to measure what their the dry weight was afterwards, after this entire study. So, and we looked at what their change in mass was over that period. So I'm having some out of order stuff. Slideshow. Anyway, so when we broke down these dung piles, we found that even though dung piles that were excluded from arthropods, i.e. this group down here, they had significantly lower rates of mass loss, i.e. decomposition over the 4 weeks. There was actually no difference between invaded and non-invaded sites. So we kind of struggled to come to terms with that at first because these invaded sites were losing a bunch of species, yet the decomposition rate in those areas wasn't changing. And we know from this experiment that arthropods at least have a significant effect on the decomposition rates, even if there are other factors at play here. So we dug a little bit deeper into our diversity and abundance data, and we looked at not only our pitfall surveys, but also insects that we collected from dung piles. And we found that when we just looked at insects that either live in the dung, or lay their eggs in it, or eat the material, or in some way are associated with the the dung material, we found that those groups of insects weren't actually affected by invasion. So here we have actually two separate methods for surveying detritivores in this study. So we had the species that we found in dung piles and the species that we found in pitfall traps, which we just termed dwellers and rollers, which is just a common term for dwellers is any insects that actually live in the dung material they eat, whereas rollers roll it away. So, and we found that when you compare, for instance, pitfall trap data, we found no difference in diversity, and we also found no difference in species that we surveyed with the dung piles themselves. So basically what this is telling us is that the overall community is changing, but in sort of uneven ways. So specifically, that loss of diversity was largely driven by losses of native ants. And this kind of helped us to understand why we were seeing this massive change in diversity, but not in ecosystem function, in this case, decomposition. So we still had to answer the question, like, why are detritivores resilient? And this is still something that we're going to have to sort of figure out with like other experiments, but my best guess right now is just that termites in this ecosystem are found in massive colonies, and they're able to fight off native ants pretty effectively. They're really aggressive, and they can fight in large numbers, so they might be able to sort of match big-headed ants pound for pound in battles that occur in their areas. But the more confusing one is dung beetles, because, like I said, I've seen big-headed ants rip apart huge insects without a problem, and they really just consume anything as a source of protein. So we actually don't really know why dung beetles aren't as affected by big-headed ant invasion as other blade insects. I mean, it might be because, as you can see here, they're highly mobile. They move across large stretches of savanna. They go to those forage sites and they return to their holes. And so it might just be that they're not that their presence in an area is ephemeral enough that they're not attacked by big-headed ants immediately. But that's really the best answer I can give right now. But really the takeaway points that we have here are that big-headed ants don't affect this clade of insects as much as they do the others in the area. So when I started to dig into the literature to understand this result, I happened upon this this theory called ecological resilience theory, which basically says that even though overall biodiversity and ecosystem function are both often affected by biological invasions, they're not necessarily tied together. So a change in diversity because of an invasion might not actually change any one ecosystem function in that area. So there are a few issues with this theory of ecological resilience that I'm actually trying to address now with future research ideas. So there are two major problems. We have length of studies are at least judged by many ecologists to be inadequate to capture long-term effects of invasion on ecosystem functions. For instance, the changes that we saw in this study might just be sort of a short-term resilience of decomposers against this invasive ant, and maybe eventually they collapse just like everything else. There's also this idea of alternative stable states ecosystem functions, where the major papers that propose this ecological resilience say that maybe the functions just kind of change, but they reach this new lower state of function. But in either case, the length of studies is typically inadequate to address that issue. And there's also a lack of focus on functions provided by one or a few species. So in this system, decomposition is provided by over 40 species of beetles and termites, which there are, some people think that there are 3 species of termites on this particular conservancy. Some people say as many as like 8. So there's not really a strong consensus on how robust that insect group is that supports decomposition in this area, but we can at least say that it's a pretty diverse group of insects that provide that service. So in terms of going forward, I'm actually focusing less on the decomposition aspect of this affected ecosystem and looking at the ant portion. So the research that I'm digging into now deals with partnerships between ants and acacia trees that are sort of an iconic part of this ecosystem. If you've heard any talks by my advisor, Dr. Palmer, he kind of has spent like the last 15 to 20 years figuring out a lot of different details about this partnership, but we don't know really anything about how they affect many parts of the acacia life cycle. So for instance, when these big-headed ants invade these acacia savannas, they remove ants that would normally fight off. This is actually a parasitic beetle right there, and the ants are just digging into it before it can lay its egg. We also don't know how the tree physiology itself changes in response to invasion. So this is a photosynthesis meter that I dragged out to Kenya this last year, and we found some pretty cool results looking at invaded trees that are basically changing their physiology in response to big-headed ant invasion, the loss of the ants that live in their canopy, and possibly other factors. But this was really just a pilot study that is kind of what we're digging into now. So, and all of these factors basically could change how this tree species, which is this like, kind of looks like this knobbly, crappy acacia tree that is like you wouldn't think it's a big deal, but they are. They're nitrogen fixers. They account for most of the woody cover in this like high elephant density area. They provide microhabitats for birds and for small mammals and stuff. So they're a pretty important plant species, and we don't really know if they're going to disappear because of invasion. So if you want to learn more about that topic, I don't really have time to dig into all the different pilot projects that we've done in the last 2 years, but I just recorded a talk for the bio department that is available for anyone with a UF GatorLink username. So, so if you want to check out that, you should check out, this is my website, expandingecology.com, and this is kind of a hub for talks, publications, and also sort of general podcasts and blogs and some other media that I have put out about this system and the invasion and kind of just what it's like to live in this ecosystem. So if you're interested, we just added these tabs today if you'd like to learn more about this whole ongoing study. But anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. So I'm happy to take any questions or explain anything that I rambled right over. So thanks.